I want to thank both of you. I know on a busy schedule to come down and agree to this. Obviously, for the readers of the record in the 18th Congressional District, it's very much appreciated. All of Orange County is part of the district, so we know how important it is, and we appreciate your time. We have asking some of the questions is Chris McKenna, who covers Orange County and certainly the race. We have Ken Hall, who writes editorials for us and columns. We have Gretchen Peter-Breedy, who is our Human Resources Director. We have our publisher and president, Joe Vanderhoof, and myself, Barry Lewis. I'm the executive editor. And what we'll do is we'll offer you the chance for the two of you to just sort of a simple introduction, and then what I thought would be we'll ask some questions, and I'll kind of monitor in terms of time, and we'll give both of you a chance, and some sort of basic free flow. If the question kind of goes off kilter, either myself or somebody may rein in and say, well, let's kind of direct it back to what we wanted to talk about, and because we know time is precious and we got a lot of things on the plate.
So we're keeping it to 4 hours. Okay?
Yeah. We've got lunch coming in, and so we're good.
You'll be
no,
sorry.
If I can get it all out, next time.
4 hours will be.
Yeah.
Right. I predict a major news story in Middletown. A fire set down the street.
This could become a hostage situation.
For everyone in the room.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to give the congressman, then I would give Dr. Hayworth a chance to in the closing. If you want 2 minutes, basically, Congressman, why you are seeking re-election?
Right. Well, thank you to all of you. This is in some ways a familiar group. We've met before. We've spoken many times. And of course, you are familiar with my opponent and her record. And you have two records to compare and contrast. A lot of those records have been documented on the pages of your excellent newspaper, on which we all depend for our news and information. And let me just say, 2 years ago, I came before you. I said I wanted a chance at this job. I would be a bipartisan voice for middle-class families in the Hudson Valley. I said I was a Clinton Democrat. I pointed to my service in the Clinton administration. I pointed to the Clinton record of growing this economy, of balancing the budget the right way, of focusing on things that matter to the middle class. And I said that was going to be who I would be in office, that I wouldn't forget that I was the son of a disabled veteran, that I would remember the middle-class families like the one I grew up in. And I went to Congress and I got to work, and I heard loud and clear from people in the Hudson Valley that they were sick to death of the fighting and the gridlock and the partisan political games in Washington. They wanted somebody to listen to them, to listen to local needs and come up with local solutions to those urgent needs. And I'm proud to be back with a record of results. I passed 13 bipartisan bills through the House of Representatives. That's pretty good for a freshman in the minority. And what are they? They're focused on those local solutions. Because I went out to Warwick and met with Mike Sweeten and 200 farmers in the first few weeks of my term, and they said, we need a farm bill, and we need reforms to the crop insurance program, and we need a better H-2A program for our workers, and we need flood mitigation in the Black Dirt region. And we went to work and we got a farm bill done. That is the best farm bill that's ever been written for the Hudson Valley. And I wrote a crop insurance reform so specialty crop farmers could get better coverage. We listened to our veterans who said disability claims are taking forever. A guy named Ed Kakis from Sparrowbush, you wrote about him, came to my office, had been waiting 800 days. He lost his wife to cancer, was going to lose his house. We got in the game and helped him and 600 others like him. But we also wrote a bill called the Red Tape Reduction Act that was a year ahead of the VA scandal that allowed guys to go outside the VA system and get physicians outside of that system, private physicians, if their disability claims were being held up for that reason. We didn't just write it, we got it passed through the House in a bipartisan way, working with Congressman Chris Gibson and others, and it's a law today because of our efforts. And there are 3 bills that have been signed into law. We've written about 20 that we've authored, not just things we voted on or conference committees or caucuses we've joined, but actual legislative accomplishments, bipartisan accomplishments, because I can't do anything without working across the aisle. And if you look at the record, the independent scorers on this, National Journal, Congressional Quarterly, have put me in the top 3% of all members of Congress for bipartisanship. Top 3%. I'm very proud of that. And it's the kind of district I represent, where people want solutions. And if you look at the work I've done with Congressman Chris Gibson on things like Lyme disease, on things like the Farm Bill, on things like working for our veterans, if you look at the support I've received from State Senator Bill Larkin, you know, a 24-year veteran of the Army, a combat veteran, retired Army colonel, conservative Republican senator, he's praising my work on veterans. Why? Because we're doing things together for the Purple Heart Hall of Honor, for West Point, for guys who need help now. If you look at the support I'm getting from Republican State Senator Greg Ball, same thing. He singled out my work on veterans. So I'm proud to be back with you this morning with a record of results. And really, you know, what I'm saying to people is I want to renew this contract. I see this as a job interview. And I'm asking for a 2-year extension on this contract because we're doing so many things. I want our small cities to be centers of economic opportunity again. I want to keep working with Joe DiStefano on rebuilding the city of Middletown, on bringing small businesses back to Main Street, on having young families show up and say, we want to renovate these properties and send our kids to good schools. I want to see the city of Newburgh thrive again. That's why I'm working to rebuild that port. That's why I fought to keep Hudson Valley Lighting there and succeeded in getting them $3 million in infrastructure improvements so that they could do a 140,000 square foot expansion in the city of Newburgh to help that tax base get rebuilt. That's why we've done the improvements to Orange County Airport, to Stewart Airport. And we're going to keep doing this work if we get the opportunity to do so. And that's the record that I've built in the short time I've been in Congress, and it's the focus I'll have if I'm given the opportunity to continue to serve. Thank you.
Dr. Hayworth, you want the job back?
Well, I am privileged to be a mom, a doctor who cared for patients here in the Hudson Valley for nearly 20 years, who's been a neighbor in the Hudson Valley for about 30 years. And I'm privileged to be the daughter of 2 World War II veterans, so I have a lot of deep roots and concerns about our Hudson Valley and the direction in which not only our Hudson Valley is headed, but our nation is headed. We have not been helped, unfortunately, and I was driving through Middletown this morning to come here, and I see a lot of folks on the street who deserve better opportunities and jobs, a better standard of living than, unfortunately, all too many folks are encountering here. There is an agenda that has hurt the Hudson Valley, that has hurt middle-class families here, working families here, our mom-and-pop businesses on our main streets, and it is an agenda that the congressman has consistently supported. His first vote in Congress was to return Nancy Pelosi to the speaker's seat. He has voted consistently with the agenda that she, when she was speaker, and that President Obama have imposed on the people of the Hudson Valley. We aren't hiring in the Hudson Valley because folks here, our small businesses that are the engine of our economy, aren't able to hire the way they'd like to because they can't afford the taxes, the mandates coming out of Washington. Start with the Affordable Care Act, also known, of course, as Obamacare. Our insurance premiums have skyrocketed. I hear these sad stories every day. Deductibles have gone up. This is $1 trillion gift to the insurance industry, courtesy of the agenda that the congressman supports. He supports that $1 trillion gift to the insurance industry. And where does that come from? It comes from the pockets of hardworking people here. It comes in lost job opportunities. It comes in $716 billion taken away from Medicare that our seniors rely on. I know, I'm a doctor. I took care of those seniors for 20 years. This is the agenda that the congressman supports. This is the agenda of burdens on our Hudson Valley that he cannot defend. Our electricity prices have spiked here in the Hudson Valley. Why? Because the regulators arbitrarily decided that they wanted to increase electricity prices in the Hudson Valley. The congressman has supported that agenda. He has failed to rein in the regulators. He wants to close Indian Point. He wants to see 2,000 people lose their jobs. He wants to see Indian Point employees. He wants to see higher energy prices and electricity prices. He wants to see more pollution in the Hudson Valley. This is his agenda. It's an agenda that folks in the Hudson Valley simply can't accept. I am here as a doctor, as a mom, as a neighbor who cares about the Hudson Valley, who wants to help everyone here thrive and do better. I am here to lift burdens because I stand with the folks in the Hudson Valley. The congressman stands with Washington, with an agenda that we simply can't afford.
Doc, let me ask you, I'll start with the first question. You talked obviously about the economy and the agenda. Can you give me 3 specific examples how you would look to turn around the staggered economy that we have here? Not so much the budget, but the economy itself, that you,
Well,
some of
sure.
the things that you've outlined.
Well, the
that you
first
would
thing
do
we have
with
to
it.
do is, number one, we have to put people back to work. And how do we put people back to work? Well, we make it easier for them to find work to begin with. We make it easier for the mom and pop Main Street businesses, the folks I was just talking about, to be able to keep going here in the Hudson Valley and hire in the Hudson Valley. I'm very blessed to have the strong endorsement of the National Federation of Independent Business. That's the mom and pops, that's the small businesses. I have the U.S. Chamber's endorsement as well, those are the bigger guys. But the reason I have their endorsement is because I have voted consistently to lift burdens from them, to make sure that they don't have to pay skyrocketing premiums for health care for their employees, to make sure that we rein in the regulators so that their energy prices are affordable here in the Hudson Valley. That is a crucial issue if we're going to grow our economy and put people back to work in the Hudson Valley. Next thing, how about this? Let's make the cost of living lower here in the Hudson Valley. The avalanche of mandates coming down from Washington have only made life harder for people here in the Hudson Valley. Those are mandates, taxes, regulations that we need someone in Washington to fight against. That's why I have that endorsement. I have fought against those things. I have fought to rein in the regulators who imposed high energy prices on us. I co-sponsored the REINS Act, which would have required any regulator to be accountable to the Congress, to your representatives in Congress, for any regulation that would cost more than $50 million imposed on our population. And that's a very important piece of legislation that I co-sponsored and strongly supported. Third, let's help our seniors. Our seniors right now are struggling on fixed incomes here in the Hudson Valley. The electricity prices I just talked about, the spike that FERC put on us because there was no REINS Act to rein them in, that causes direct hardship to them. But what else does? They are losing their Medicare benefits. They are losing access to the doctors and hospitals that they rely on. Why? Because $716 billion has come out of Medicare in that $1 trillion gift to the insurance industry called the Affordable Care Act. The congressman has supported this Washington agenda, this Pelosi, Obama, Maloney agenda, and we need to lift those burdens. I will do so, and we'll have a much easier time trying to get back to work here in the Hudson Valley and afford to live here.
Congressman, same question, 3 examples?
Sure. Well, if you want to talk specific examples, particularly for Orange County, I think we should be specific. I mean, there's a lot of that sort of airy stuff about lifting burdens. The fact of the matter is...
It's not airy stuff, that's people's lives.
Well, here's one business you didn't help. I mean, Taylor Biomass is 200 or 300 good jobs at in a place in this county that really needs it. Jim Taylor, who's a Republican, who's a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and who's a big supporter of the Chamber of Commerce, and who the Chamber of Commerce supports, also has the support of every other Republican elected official, from the county executive to the assembly people to the state senators. The only person who wouldn't help him is my opponent, because she doesn't believe that there's any role for government to play. I think a guy who's got $40 million of his own money trying to create jobs in Orange County deserves a good partner in Washington. That's what I'm working on. I'm working to rebuild the Port of Newburgh. We should be capturing the Panamax container traffic that is going to explode once the new ships start coming through the new Panama Canal. We should be bringing those containers up to the Port of Newburgh, and we should be taking advantage of the distribution infrastructure we had, and we should be investing in that infrastructure. That's why I brought $12 million back for Stewart Airport, because Stewart Airport could be an economic engine. It's why the Startup New York program that I'm working on with the governor, Congresswoman opposes it, but we now have a proposal to expand that to the site at Stewart Airport, which means that business park will get going in the town of New Windsor. Maybe that's why Republican Supervisor George Green is supporting my campaign, not the Congresswoman's. These are specific proposals. Here's a few more. The Farm Bill has very important provisions to do flood mitigation in the Black Dirt region. We have to clean up the H-2A program. That will really free up our farmers to do what they do best, which is grow things and produce good food for our schools. Those are other specific ideas to help our economy here. If you look at the example of Hudson Valley Lighting, This is a company that was going to California. It's got a 100-year history here in Orange County. And they're doing a 140,000 square foot expansion in the city of Newburgh because my office got in the game with them and helped because they needed sewer improvements. They want to build on an old landfill. There's a bunch of public infrastructure issues there that a business has a right to expect the government's going to take care of. I think that's my job. And these are specific examples. Now, in terms of the Affordable Care Act, I voted against it more than just about anybody in my party. Ken knows this. He's been writing about it. I think I voted against the president 44% of the time on key votes in that. I opposed all kinds of parts of the Affordable Care Act, just like I said I would when I ran. I also introduced legislation to improve it. The Congresswoman wants to repeal it, go back. She has no plan. She didn't write one bill when she was in Congress, not a single one. And if you look at energy prices, well, you guys have been covering the work I've done with Congressman Chris Gibson. We passed a bill through the House of Representatives to stop FERC. That's more than anybody ever did about it. This is a mess that was left for us by the Congresswoman and others. We got in the game, worked together, and we're going to win this thing. FERC's going to reopen this on November 5th, and we are going to stop these energy price hikes. That's not rhetoric, that's a result. And if you look at things like, things like Medicare, you know, the Congresswoman was here 2 years ago saying we had to blow it up. We had to end the traditional guarantee of Medicare. She said it was going to go bankrupt. And what did we do? We did smart reforms in Medicare that are saving $800 billion over the next decade the right way, without doing what she wanted to do, which is scrap it, turn it into a voucher, end the traditional program, which would have been terrible for our middle-class families. And of course, she wanted to privatize Social Security and the rest. Her agenda was a radical Tea Party agenda. It had nothing to do with local needs. It had nothing to do with specific solutions for local problems like the ones I've mentioned. And that's a big difference between us.
Barry, there's a reason that the mom and pop Main Street businesses support me and support me strongly, because I'm here to help every person who wants to keep going here in the Hudson Valley and get a job. Not specific favors for people who, like Jim Taylor, have lined the congressman's pockets with $100,000 worth of bundled contributions, at least. Not like Hudson Valley Lighting, which held a fundraiser for Mr. Maloney's campaign 2 months, conveniently 2 months before the $2.9 million for the sewer line came in. It's one thing to try to help your campaign contributors. It's another thing to try to actually provide the kind of relief that folks here actually need. There was not a word from the congressman about the kind of actual relief that people need from a Washington that imposes too much on us. What we hear is that, you know, let me see if I can work a favor for you. The regulators want to stomp all over the Hudson Valley. If you guys yell loud enough, maybe we'll do something about it. There is no guarantee whatsoever, unfortunately, sadly, for folks here in the Hudson Valley who are suffering already and have been for months under these higher energy prices, that FERC will change its mind. I know what it's like to deal with FERC because I stood, unlike the congressman, with the folks in Minnesink when they objected to a compressor station being built in the middle of a neighborhood. I fought FERC. And I can tell you, FERC pretty much has a mind of its own on these things. So unless you have laws that say, FERC and other regulators, you have to come to the U.S. Congress, you have to come to our representatives in Congress and be accountable and get permission before you impose on our people, there is no real relief. If we have this $1 trillion gift to the insurers in place, seniors relying on Medicare are going to continue to suffer, which is what is happening now. They are losing access. This is a $716 billion transfer of benefits that they paid for into a system that simply guarantees that the insurers are going to come out on top and continue to call the shots on folks here in the Hudson Valley. We see it every day. The congressman has done nothing to stop that juggernaut. I have, and I will continue to do so.
Well, let's stay on the Affordable Care Act. Dr. Hayworth, you still think it's possible to repeal the Affordable Care Act? Is that something you would
I definitely
continue to support? But
yeah,
if
go
not,
ahead.
are there improvements in it that you would support?
Right. Well, as a doctor, I mean, I know because I've been on the front lines, treated patients for 20 years in the Hudson Valley. people would come to me and say they're insurers. They'd paid for their benefits, they'd paid their premiums, they'd done everything they were supposed to do, and they'd come to me and say their coverage had been denied. Now, if my patients came to me and they were denied coverage, I would still take care of them, but I knew that they would go other places where that wouldn't be the case. It is a terrible thing. We don't want the insurers in charge. That was the whole idea, no question, that motivated folks to try to do something. But this law is the wrong thing. In fact, what happened is it ended up putting the insurers even more in charge, and this time guaranteed by taxpayer dollars and Medicare beneficiaries. So what we need to do is actually make the insurers compete so that they're actually going to have to present us with products that will cost us less. That means you have to open up competition. Unfortunately, the terms of the Affordable Care Act actually close competition. They actually make us dependent in every single state on whatever the state regulators approve. Why not open it up so you can buy the way big companies do? That's why they get the best rates, because they open it up across the country. Why can't folks here do that? Affordable Care Act doesn't allow people to do that. I want to allow people to do that. I want them to have their own lifelong, just like Dr. Ben Carson, who's a great authority on these things, and a great speaker on these things, cares much, came from nothing and made a marvelous career for himself. And what he has said is everybody should have a health savings account that they can carry with them for life, personal, portable, and permanent, tax protected. Everybody should have that. We should help the folks who can't afford to do to put that money away. We can help them to do that. Nobody should be denied care because they have a pre-existing condition. Nobody should be denied equality in rates because they're a woman versus a man. Women shouldn't be paying more. I completely agree with that. That's a great goal that we can still serve. And yes, absolutely, should people under the age of 26 be allowed to stay on their parents' insurance? Sure, but we can do all of those good things and make sure nobody is denied coverage without giving $1 trillion to the insurance industry, which is what we're doing now.
Well, you have to listen closely because, right, what the Congresswoman means is she would love it if all those things existed sort of out there in the world. She just doesn't want to do anything about it. And she does want to repeal it, which guarantees gridlock and fighting and all the nonsense we've seen in Washington for so many years. We should fix what's not working, and we should move forward. The Congresswoman introduced not one piece of legislation when she had the chance, in the majority, in the Congress, to do anything about the Affordable Care Act. Because the truth is, while I told you I've passed 13 bipartisan bills through Congress, she doesn't have any legislative accomplishments, none. And it's because she spent all her time on these political arguments and these games that get played. Look, she said we shouldn't require insurance companies to keep kids on your policy till 26. She said there should be a private market solution for that. So you have to listen carefully when she says she supports the goals. She just doesn't want to do anything about it. She opposed everything else in there that's good. If the insurance companies were in charge, Congresswoman, when they could deny people with pre-existing conditions, we did away with that. That's good. They have to send you back a rebate check now when they're spending too much on bonuses or on overhead. That's good. There are good things in healthcare reform. We just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should fix what's broken. I'll give you an example. I've actually written some legislation on this because a guy named Gary Levine comes to me and says, my wife and I run a small business. We used to qualify for group coverage. Now we don't. What's up with that? I said, you're right. And I wrote a bill called the Mom and Pop Shop Act that will allow small businesses to qualify for group coverage again. We can do things better than the Affordable Care Act. I have voted against this bill as much as anybody in the Democratic Party. And it certainly isn't following some agenda she's talking about when I'm in the top 3% of all members of Congress for bipartisanship, mostly because of my votes against parts of the Affordable Care Act. I voted against the individual mandate. I voted against the health insurance tax. I voted against the medical device tax. I opposed the $700 billion cut that she keeps talking about, which of course was in the Ryan budget that she supported twice. So that's just a bizarre charge because she voted for it twice, and I always opposed it. I opposed the IPAB. I mean, there's all kinds of things in the Affordable Care Act. I've sat in this room and kicked it around with you guys and said, I wasn't in Congress when they kicked this whole thing up, but I do think there's good things in there. I know we got 1 million New Yorkers who have enrolled on the exchange here in New York, and they expect some stability in their lives. And our goal, it seems to me, as common sense people, is to work together and to figure out what's not working well and move forward. And I think That is the only common sense, responsible thing to do now. And it's what I heard from people all over Orange County. They said, work with each other, work it through. This go back and repeal it and don't worry, we'll replace it with something is a formula for gridlock. And I don't think we should go back and do that. I think we should move forward and not go back and fight.
Does it make sense to make some changes to it without having to repeal it?
Well, the individual, we have to correct the record here. What the congressman just said is absolutely false. He voted against the individual mandate in 2013 and then under pressure voted for the individual mandate in 2014. The individual mandate alone is a tremendous burden that's really almost impossible for our young people in this county and folks who are having trouble just getting by under the agenda that the congressman supports. The individual mandate is an unbearable burden for most people in this economy. And again, it has to do with this fundamentally is $1 trillion gift to the insurance industry. The congressman has voted 80% of the time with the agenda that imposes burdens on us that make it impossible for us to afford the cost of this gift to the insurance industry. And this is the problem. We can do so much better. We can accomplish the goals we want to accomplish. We can take the insurers out of the picture. Right now, they are in charge. We can put ourselves in charge, but it does take a new approach. And that's what I'm talking about. The
So are you
congressman
talking
has
about-
done nothing effectively
So are you talking about
to do that.
repealing it or just making changes to it?
I think we need to replace it with a fresh approach, and I do think we need to have a fresh approach. We need to have a plan, and we need to have something that will honor the goals that everybody wants to see happen.
So fight to repeal it and replace it with something else?
You'd have to replace it with a plan that accomplished all the goals that we just talked about, put $716 billion back into Medicare. The congressman can't get around that. That law requires that $716 billion come out of Medicare. That is the law right now. It has to be overturned.
And the problem with repealing it?
Well, the time to do any of the things she just said would have been when she was in Congress and had the opportunity to contribute some ideas to this or some legislation to this. Go look, there's nothing, zero, zip, nada. All there is are 31 votes to scrap it. And since she's been out of Congress, there's been about another 25 votes to repeal it. Because the Tea Party leadership in Congress is obsessed with repealing this law. Listen, I've voted against a bunch of big pieces of this thing. That's why I'm in the top 3% of my party for voting against my leadership. I mean, it's a funny thing to be part of some agenda when you keep voting against it.
Because 80%
I've
of the
got
time you have Congress.
Well, that 80% number is a game that people in Washington play. I mean, John Boehner probably votes with Nancy Pelosi 30-40% of the time because a lot of the stuff we do is uncontroversial. So this is a game they play to say, look at the independent records. The independent records of the National Journal and the Congressional Quarterly have put me in the top 3%, number 7 in the Democratic Party out of 200. That's the fact. And on the ACA, I voted against the president about 44% of the time. Here's why. Because I'm listening to people locally who say, keep what's good and fix what's wrong. Don't go down and play these Washington political games. Listen to us. We like the idea that our kids are on our policy till 26. That's the only nice thing somebody's done for the middle class in a long time. And that really helps kids, particularly when they're struggling with high student loan debt. But my goodness, we can do better in lots of ways, and I'm legislating. I'm working on that and listening to people. I do think the fundamental difference between us is that for some reason the Congresswoman can't just say, yeah, there's some good stuff in here. Why don't we just fix what's wrong?
I just did.
No, this fresh approach and go back and start over. You've consistently said we need to repeal it, and then there's this sort of we can replace it. But what that really means is you're going to descend into gridlock in Washington again, and we've had enough of that. We want to work together. We want to go forward, and I just think that's the difference on this thing.
Barry, do you know any middle-class families who are saying these days that they're doing great here in the Hudson Valley? Because, wow, my insurance is so much more affordable now, and here are small businesses, the lifeblood of our economy, saying, gee, you know what, I'm all ready to take off and grow and hire. here in this economy, and the terms of the Affordable Care Act have actually made it easier for me to afford insurance for my employees. You really just don't hear that kind of thing, Congressman. If you're actually listening to folks here in the Hudson Valley, they're struggling. They're great people who deserve so much better, and they're struggling. The stories of people who go to the pharmacy counter and say they can't get their prescription because they haven't paid their $2,000 deductible. I know, I hear those stories. I'm a doctor. People whose insurance premiums have skyrocketed, doubled, and their deductibles have gone up, and they don't know what they're going to do, and that's on the exchange. You know, that's the terms of this law. So we can accomplish those great goals, but we need a very different law to do it. This law is a disaster, and the individual mandate is a disaster, and Congressman, you support the individual mandate. You can't get beyond that.
Chris, another?
You both brought up FERC and the capacity zone that you're both against, and it's very unpopular here. Do you have other ideas for attracting new power generators to this area other than what they did?
Yeah, sure. Well, Taylor Biomass is a renewable energy project that would produce 20 megawatts, in Montgomery. It would create hundreds of good jobs. It's a replicable technology. We could do that technology in 200-300 sites around the country, and you would have that IP and that technology and that job creation right here in Orange County. We also have tremendous opportunities in terms of conservation, which is, of course, the best generation. That's why I support legislation. I wrote legislation called the Property Assessed Clean Energy Bill, PACE, which allows homeowners to do energy improvements on their homes, put it on the property tax bill, finance it over time, and have it travel with the deed. That's a good idea. We also have a legislation, because I listened to folks locally who said we got a lot of damage during the superstorms. We need a lot of work on our schools. Why don't we do that work with green energy efficiency improvements, pay for them over the savings over time, and we can reduce our energy consumption, invest in our schools, and do something good for the environment. I wrote a bill to do that because I listened to people locally. And we have very good transmission opportunities here that we should pursue before we artificially hike up prices. I told you, Chris Gibson and I have done more on stopping this FERC thing than anybody's ever done, and we're going to win it. We got them to reopen it on November 5th. So that's more than a lot of talk. That is some hard bipartisan work, working with the county executives, the chambers of commerce. The Poughkeepsie Journal said we did excellent bipartisan work on this. They wrote an editorial on it. There's a clear record on this. And it's not some Tea Party fantasy called the RAINS Act that would destroy all kinds of health and safety regulation that wouldn't even apply to FERC, that has nothing to do with this. And the fact is, I went to FERC when I got to office and said, what's been going on this? Because they keep logs, they keep records of any contact with a member of Congress they're required to. There's not a speech, there's not a letter, there's not a phone call, there's certainly not a meeting that Congresswoman Hayworth did on this. The truth is, there was nothing that had happened on this. It got cooked up while she was in Congress, and we went right to work, and we wrote letters, we brought a lawsuit, I delivered petitions personally in the rain one day. I went and met with Cheryl LaFleur, the acting commissioner. We got the new commissioner to guarantee to reopen it, which he's doing. And when all that wasn't enough, we passed a bill, my goodness, through the House of Representatives on this docket number. And we passed it working together, me and Chris Gibson. That's bipartisan work. And if we stop that and we do the new generation things, we focus on renewables, we take advantage of the transmission opportunities, we do some smart conservation work, we can bring manufacturing jobs back to the Hudson Valley. I've got some legislation and some ideas on this too, because we got to keep those energy prices low so we can get job creation again, and we can make things again, and support middle-class families again with good wages and good benefits. And we can do those things if we're smart.
Number one, the congressman wants 2,000 people here in the Hudson Valley we're already desperate for jobs here in the Hudson Valley. 2,000 people will lose their jobs if the congressman's plan goes through and he closes Indian Point Energy Center. That is a place that, if closed, okay, if we closed Indian Point, which is the congressman's energy plan here, our energy prices would spike even higher, probably go up about 30%. 2,000 people would lose their jobs, and we'd have more pollution here in the Hudson Valley because Indian Point only emits water vapor. Its continued safe operation is a very important part of keeping our energy prices low here in the Hudson Valley, which is why I support it, and I support an all of the above energy generation plan. But when the congressman says that, the RAINS Act is a crazy idea, the man he was just praising, rightly so, Chris Gibson's a great member of Congress, Chris Gibson voted for it. We need to keep the regulators like FERC from playing with the folks in the Hudson Valley by arbitrarily raising our electricity prices. That kind of thing makes no sense. It has caused hardships here in the Hudson Valley. Higher energy prices, lost jobs, more pollution. That is the congressman's agenda. Part of that, Taylor Biomass, New York Public Interest Research Group, and the Partnership for Policy Integrity, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, have condemned that project as an incinerator that will put more lead, cadmium, arsenic, dioxin, and benzene into the local environment in Montgomery. I mean, talk about a terrible idea. And because they have applied for it to be a gasification project, the evidence for which is tenuous at best, because they've applied in that way, they will be allowed to spew all these pollutants into the air because they're under fewer restrictions than they are if they're an incinerator. It's an absolute disgrace, and the only reason the congressman supports it is because Mr. Taylor and his friends have lined his pocket with $100,000. So much for the people of the
Wow.
Hudson Valley, so much for the environment here, and I'm not done, Congressman. The Pace Protection Act. The congressman is not the originator of the Pace Protection Act, but I'll tell you who is, because you're looking at her. I wrote the Pace Protection Act, although you'd never hear that from the congressman. And it's a shame that he doesn't give credit to two great constituents here and colleagues here in our Hudson Valley. Jeff Tannenbaum, who actually came up with the idea for PACE, I know because I sat down with him in December of 2010 and talked about the PACE program. It's a great program to make energy saving and water saving improvements affordable. I know because I wrote the bill. And David Gabrielson, who's a great Democratic town councilman in the town of Bedford, my hometown. And David and Jeff and I worked together with Don Scott, a great fellow citizen, to come up with this plan. And this Pace Protection Act. And it's just a shame, Congressman, that you are trying to take credit for the great work that other people do. But it is a great idea. It's part of a whole picture of solutions that we have to have. But what we can't afford is to have more pollution, lost jobs, and higher energy prices in the Hudson Valley. And that's what you're hearing from the Congressman.
I really have to correct a couple. I mean, even in the context of a contested congressional campaign where a lot of stuff gets thrown around, I mean, what you just said is absolutely irresponsible, and you know it. And you went all over the Hudson
The record will show,
Valley.
sir, that I originated the Pace
Congresswoman,
Protection Act.
I didn't interrupt you. If I might get a word in, please. You said Jim Taylor's project was great in 2012. You said he's a great guy. You said you hope it thrives. You want it to work. Your problem was you didn't want to do anything to help him because you had this Tea Party view that if there was any sort of federal assistance to anybody, it was something wrong. Now, because he's supporting me. Now, bear in mind, I was supporting Jim Taylor long before he was supporting me. And I was supporting David Littman long before he ever supported me. And they're both Republicans, my goodness. And they are job creators.
And
You
they're
like to talk
campaign
about them,
donors.
but sometimes they have specific needs like infrastructure or a loan guarantee.
Follow the money.
Listen, Congresswoman, the Taylor Biomass Project is supported by folks all over the spectrum, Democrats and Republicans. You are the only person that I know of in a position of any authority who didn't help or support it. You praised it to the hilt, and the only reason you're criticizing it now is because he's supporting me, and it's wrong. You shouldn't be maligning him. You shouldn't be running down a good project, and I'll guarantee you, the guys in the Contractors Association who are supporting me, in the Chamber of Commerce who support Jim Taylor in that project, they've paid attention to this, and they are disgusted by this slanderous stuff you're saying that is not supported by any
New York
evidence.
Public Interest
Listen,
Research Group and PPI.
listen,
Not
listen,
I.
if-
I'm quoting other people.
If I can just say, it is ironic that someone with a 43% score from the League of Conservation Voters, Congresswoman Hayworth, has one of the worst environmental records of any New Yorker who's ever gone to Congress. I mean, my goodness, this is someone who denied the science of climate change in 2010 to the Bedford
I'm a
Patch.
scientist. I
This
do
is
deny the
well,
science of climate
you said it to the Bedford Patch, and in addition to that, voted to destroy the centerpiece of our global warming strategy, which is to get after the greenhouse gas emissions by coal plants. The Congresswoman opposed the plan to do that. That's why she has a terrible score from the League of Conservation Voters. I mean, a failing score. And so to come around now and to pretend that there's some environmental reason why you support a job engine for Orange County that will put people to work, that is good technology, that is a private sector solution. I mean, you got to decide. You got to decide whether you want to lift burdens or you whether want to impose them. What I want to do is listen to the folks who are doing good things locally and be a partner to them. Leverage those efforts, remove obstacles, blow through walls, cut red tape, get things going. And that's what my record has been for my first 2 years. in office.
200 million taxpayer dollars, $200 million from hardworking taxpayers, okay? That could go to infrastructure, that could go to actual relief here in the Hudson Valley. The congressman wants them to go to one project because he's gotten $100,000 worth of campaign
Okay,
cash.
we're gonna move off that.
$200 million, not acceptable.
Bipartisanship keeps coming up. Congressman Gibson, you talk about it a lot. Could you give us some examples of your bipartisan actions?
Sure. Well, the first day I was in the House of Representatives, I actually got together with a fellow freshman, David Cicilline from Rhode Island, and we formed the Common Ground Caucus so that we could get together and get to know each other in the House of Representatives and work together. So that's one example. I was actually one of 8 House Republicans who was chosen to make sure that we worked with the Senate leadership, of course the Democratic leadership of the Senate, not only that, but with Democrats from the House, to make sure that Medicare benefits and unemployment insurance benefits, federal unemployment insurance, and the payroll tax holiday were continued throughout the year 2012. That was a major accomplishment, actually, that took place only because we were all able to work together and because of my ability to work across the aisle. And I'm actually the only woman physician ever made a member of Congress, interestingly enough, ever elected a member. So because of those qualities, I was able to get that job done. When the congressman talks about legislative accomplishments, that was a major one. He, as in the case of the Pace Protection Act, he is not being accurate, and you can go to the record, you can go to congress.gov, and you can see that, in fact, I've passed more pieces of legislation than the congressman has. But I have worked consistently across the aisle to make sure that, that things get done.
I'd love to hear about those pieces of legislation because you can't name one, because there aren't any. There is
Congressman,
no.
I
There
just
is no.
did.
Well, no, that's a conference committee, and
It's
let me tell you,
legislation.
if
It was made the law.
I think this is going to work better.
I think
if we
that's
just,
legislation.
If we don't interrupt, I think it just works better. But here's what you do
It's
with a
better if you tell
conference
the
committee,
truth.
Ken. When you look at who got placed on that conference committee, it was the folks who would rubber stamp the Tea Party leadership's bidding. I mean, that's why the congresswoman got put on that committee. It wasn't to write the bill; it was already written. It wasn't to do anything. It was to rubber stamp what the leadership wanted. That's why you put someone like Congresswoman Hayworth in there. And if you look, she voted against the payroll tax 6 times before she got on that committee. That would have helped middle class people, actually. They were the ones holding up the extension of unemployment benefits. We actually remember what happened at the end of 2011. I mean, if you look at the votes on Planned Parenthood, the Congresswoman wanted to destroy Planned Parenthood, take away all its funding. That is a bipartisan community health center that helps 31,000 families in the Hudson Valley. If you look at her record on Medicare, where she wanted to destroy the bipartisan consensus of 60, 70 years, that people paying into that program ought to be able to count on it and blow it up and turn it into a voucher. If you look at her plans to privatize Social Security, these are radical notions. And they are in place for a reason, because she's trying to pay for big tax cuts to multimillionaires like herself. And so you go after all these middle class programs. That's not a bipartisan record. And David Cicilline is supporting me, of course, in this campaign. He says the Common Ground Caucus, never did anything. I've heard her talk about Peter Welch after Hurricane Irene. We remember her record after Hurricane Irene. It was disastrous for Orange County. And she wanted to cut the budget before helping our farmers here. And Peter Welch, who was counting on her on that caucus, issued a statement this week saying she didn't do anything on that, that I'm the one that has gotten the results on that. So I think if any fair look at the record, will point out that my record is just more bipartisan, and we're actually getting results. And you've documented a lot of this in the newspaper.
Hurricane Irene, I was in our district. I was in Orange County the night of the hurricane. While the congressman was at home in Manhattan, I was here. I went with Ron Myruski and Paul Ruskevich in Pine Island. I saw the onion crop floating in the fields. I was the first member of Congress to ask for full disaster designations for all of our counties after Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee. I went right to work in Washington, and not only about those disaster designations, those declarations, but also to make sure that as co-chair of the Hurricane Irene Coalition with Peter Welch, who is a good man and is a friend, that we got $11.5 billion appropriated for relief in our devastated areas. $11.5 billion. And that is an accomplishment I'm very proud of. And I did it working with Democrats and Republicans, including Nita Lowey, including Chris Gibson, including Peter Welch. This is something I'm very proud of.
Well, I'm surprised the congresswoman wants to talk about Hurricane Irene, because this newspaper, of all newspapers, documented very clearly what her response was. I mean, at the hour of greatest devastation, it was her comment that we had, well, there's a natural disaster, but we also have an economic disaster. You all remember that. And what she meant by that was that we should cut the budget somewhere else before we fully funded FEMA. This is while her own district's underwater. Congresswoman, that was your worst day in Congress.
$11.5 billion
let me finish,
says
please.
what,
And the
excuse
farmer-
me,
and the
Congressman, this
farmer
is just
said-
ridiculous. $11.5 billion says it all. You were in Manhattan, I was here. Ask Ron
if I may
Myrewski,
finish my
ask
answer.
Paul Ruskevich, ask Mike Sweeten, ask Ed Astorino, who said he was amazed. He's the highway supervisor in Warwick, and he said he was amazed because he called us about a culvert bridge that had been washed out, and they were having a lot of trouble trying to get the right kind of appropriation for it. And I drove out there myself.
I would encourage you to search the files of the Times Herald-Record for the story on the $11.5 billion in Irene relief, because you will not find it. It doesn't exist. I've heard her say that
$11.5
number a few
billion
times.
exists.
Congressman, you're going to have to let me answer at some point. It'll work
you have to
better, I
tell the
promise.
truth.
The fact is that the entire Irene relief bill was only $6.8 billion. I don't even know where you're getting that figure. And the most important Irene relief was in the Sandy disaster relief bill. That was still unfinished because these guys were too busy fighting about it. And when we got to Congress, we got it done, and we made it retroactive to Irene and to Lee. And that's why the guys are getting help now in the black dirt. We also wrote in the Farm Bill flood mitigation provisions, so the Secretary of Agriculture has to focus on black dirt regions like ours. We went to work on helping folks with individual assistance, so they got the payments they need, but also the future mitigation stuff right here in Middletown. We chased $11.5 million that is real and announced it with John Bonisic and the county executive. We ran it through the county, never been done before, and that's going to help with real mitigation projects right here in Middletown. Here's the point. The point is that even when a disaster struck like Hurricane Irene, the Congresswoman's first priority was to line up with the leadership that was fighting this ideological war in Washington. And that's why you guys documented this. She missed the fact that when it's your district underwater, it's your job to help, and you
I was
you let
there
somebody
looking.
else.
I was there watching.
And you let somebody else cut the budget.
I was there witnessing the devastation.
Let me ask you both.
While you were in Manhattan, Congressman, and I went back and got immediate disaster designation, immediate, and $11.5 billion of aid appropriated. You can't.
I want to ask you both
Argue
about
that
Ebola, both in the news. You both have talked about travel restrictions, which is a pretty broad term. Can you be very specific regarding travel restrictions? Doing a lot
Sure.
of traveling these days, and there's a concern. What do you want to close and not close?
Well, there are about 200 people a day right now flying directly from the most affected countries directly to the United States. That's the first thing we should stop. There are a lot of folks who transit through third countries and come to the United States, through Abu Dhabi, through Amsterdam, through Paris. We need better quarantine protocols on that type of travel to the United States. Meaning, you need to ask people where they've been. You need to take their temperature. You need to track them. Because that is the most likely source for additional infection in the United States. The administration has had a very slow and completely unacceptable response on this. They were slow off the mark. They didn't get their act together. Nobody knew who was in charge. We need to get somebody in charge, and we need to make sure that healthcare workers are better protected, that they aren't walking around in the community or getting on airplanes after they've been treating somebody who might be infected. And we need to make sure we have better protocols in place before we put 4,000 men and women from our military in the middle of the hot zone, which the administration plans to do. I'm very concerned about that. And my goodness, this should be a wake-up call that we need to stop cutting the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health, the Hayworth budget plan, cut CDC, cut NIH, the sequester, which was the biggest fiscal mess that the Congresswoman left for us when we got to Washington, cut across the board mindlessly the very programs we now count on. And that REINS Act bill that we talked about earlier that would subject to congressional gridlock all sorts of critical regulations would also affect emergency responses to things like an Ebola outbreak. So there are some very active things we need to do, and there's some things we need to stop doing, and cutting our research and our disease centers is right at the top of the list.
Congressman?
Look, I'm a doctor, so I understand completely and have supported fully medical research, medical innovation. One of the aspects, unfortunately, of the Affordable Care Act is, of course, that we have a medical device tax that imposes burdens on medical innovators here.
But that has nothing to do with
that's-
Ebola travel.
Well, actually, we need to develop vaccines. We need, and part of the response to Ebola is that we actually need to activate a vaccine innovation program and deploy it in West Africa, and that's going to be a crucial piece of this. So we need to have leadership from the administration, which we did not have clearly. We need to have guidelines from the CDC that actually will protect our healthcare workers here. We didn't have those. That's why 2 nurses are infected with Ebola. And I read the CDC guidelines and in fact commented on them last week that they were not adequate. They have just come out with new guidelines today that are more restrictive in terms of protecting, more comprehensive in terms of protecting the healthcare workers, because once patients are in a certain stage of the disease, it's an extremely dangerous situation.
Travel
restrictions? Absolutely. Visa holders from these countries must be restricted from entering the United States
But they
at
don't
this
come from
point.
these countries, they come from Europe and then they come in here.
But the visas come from these countries. We can identify, we can follow who is coming from these endangered areas. It's a manageable problem. And then we need to allow aid workers to be able to have the kind of transportation they need to get in and out. The President cited that as a concern. That's a concern that we can deal with. And we do need to prepare our military appropriately. I'm hoping and praying that the guidelines that they have for our soldiers who are being deployed there are adequate to protect them. And certainly we have the best men and women in the world in our military. So I have every faith in them, but we need leadership from the President and from the CDC that will assure that they'll be protected.
We have a bureaucrat now heading as the Ebola czar. Are you support that move?
Look, I want somebody in charge.
Is that the
so-
right person to be in charge?
Well, let's judge by actions. What's important are actions, and we've just talked about some of them. And I think right at the top of the list is that this needs to be a wake-up call, not just to get a handle on the Ebola outbreak as it exists right now, but to be ready if we have future outbreaks of viruses like this. I mean, my goodness, had this been an airborne strain of Ebola and not the traditional strain of Ebola, would we have been ready for the type of rapid infections that can occur in that situation? So we ought to rethink all this, and I'll tell you, it is a real thing to cut CDC, and it is a real thing to cut NIH, and we don't need to do that. In the Clinton administration, we balanced the budget the right way. These guys talk about it. We did it, and we didn't go after CDC and NIH. And for the Congresswoman to say she supports fully funding research is great, except that the American Cancer Institute asked her if she supported funding cancer research, and she said no, it's right on the internet. You can search it yourself. Because she doesn't believe in the federal role. She denied that additional federal funding against diseases has any correlation to better outcomes, which of course is completely contrary to what all reasonable people believe. Of course we have to invest in these things. And we shouldn't be cutting these programs to give big tax cuts to multimillionaires. We need to get our priorities straight. And I do think Ebola needs to be a wake-up call for us, that we need to have clear lines of authority, clear protocols, and we need to fund our institutions that are on the front line to this.
That's not going to happen if we have an administration that lacks leadership on these issues and insists on pursuing policies that frankly harm our people in ways that are hard to afford. I mean, the reason we're having such struggles in our economy, and the reasons the reason that we have trouble addressing budgets in general, and CDC and NIH are a tiny part of our budget, they should be fully funded, is because we have an agenda and an administration and a member of Congress here who have supported an agenda that makes it very, very difficult for us to afford to do the important things we should do. And when you think about health care, you know, the monster in the room is the law that transfers $1 trillion to the insurance industry.
But are you
know,
tying the
that's-
hands of the CDC
that's- but that's-
if you cut funding?
Nobody should be tying the hands of the CDC. The CDC needs to have all the resources that it needs at this point to get this job done. Nobody would dispute that, you know, especially not a doctor.
And the sequester plan that the Congresswoman supported and voted for, cut it. That's the cut they're trying to dig out from right now. And
The CDC budgets have varied year upon year under Democrats, under Republicans. This is, it's just the facts. Ask the CBO, and they will tell you.
This isn't like the weather. It doesn't get
They will
warm or
tell
cold.
you.
There are choices we're
But
making.
yes, and under Democrats and Republicans in the White House, in the Congress, CDC budgets have varied year upon year. But the fact of the matter is that right now, we need to deploy appropriate resources so that we protect the American people wherever they are.
Okay.
I want to talk about something you agree on, Dodd-Franks. Both of you have been critical of Dodd-Franks, both of you have worked and voted for and supported things to change it. How are we doing on changing Dodd-Franks to the best of your ability, and what else needs to be done? Either one go first, the other one go after.
Well, you know, I think you said it. I mean, you know, like any big law, again, that happened before I got to Congress, I think it's my responsibility to look at it and say what makes sense and what doesn't. And as you pointed out, I wrote legislation that changed parts of Dodd-Frank. I'll give you a couple of specifics. I think some of the restrictions on the commodity derivatives trading that helps our farmers, that creates good markets for that risk, were too tight. And I wrote legislation that would loosen some of that. I think that's good for our farmers. I have legislation that would raise the asset level for community banks before they trip into these regulations that are designed for the big banks. If you talk to Derek Weinkoop at Walden Savings, he'll tell you they're about a $498 million institution. They're just about to trip over into a whole new set of regs that Dodd-Frank puts on them. I don't think that's smart. I don't think we need our community lenders tied up in red tape. We want them lending. They're already pretty conservative. They've got a pretty good track record. They're not the guys that crashed the world economy. And I think we should remember that you know there were some terrible practices out there that destroyed this economy, that really hurt our middle class, that sent home prices plummeting. We are still digging out from under that, and we better learn some lessons from that. And so that's why you know, the Congresswoman's solution, which is to scrap it, you know, is a classic, you know, throw out the baby with the bathwater problem. We need to learn some lessons about the economic crisis we had so we don't repeat it. But it doesn't mean there aren't things we can do better. And I think that's, you know, that's the common sense approach. And it's, if you wonder why I have this bipartisan record and that I'm in the top 3% of all people for voting against my own party, it's because I try to look at these things from the perspective of what makes sense. There's this big red team, blue team game that gets played in Washington. I don't think you need somebody playing that game. I don't think you need one more person yelling at each other on MSNBC or Fox. What I heard from people is they're sick of that nonsense, and they want us to work together. And that's what I've been doing on Dodd-Frank.
You know, you talk with folks here in Orange County, anywhere in the Hudson Valley, and trying to get a loan or a mortgage for our middle-class families, for working people, small businesses, it's just next to impossible. You talk with our community lenders, you know, our community banks or savings and loans, and they'll tell you the same thing. The regulators are tying them up in red tape, and they need to be respected. They need to be allowed to do the things that they're capable of doing in our communities. And they're not right now because the regulators are leaning so heavily on them. Dodd-Frank made too big to fail the standards. So they're going to help the big banks. Wall Street's doing great. The congressman is voted 80% of the time with the people then Speaker Pelosi, whom he'd like to see Speaker again, President Obama, he has voted with this agenda that makes it impossible for folks in our communities to do the common sense things that they're capable of doing. And Dodd-Frank's an example of that.
Can you be specific about Dodd-Frank's though? Because that's overall. What about
Well,
Dodd-Frank's
absolutely,
itself?
because what
Because you
Dodd-Frank.
were critical of it. and you were
Yes, of
incumbent.
course, because Dodd-Frank actually favors the biggest financial institutions and imposes rules on our smaller financial institutions, the ones who are most active in our community in a lot of cases, that make the playing field even less level than it might have been before. I mean, it's a very unfair and burdensome law.
Would you repeal it, or are there parts of it that you think need to be changed?
I think that the fundamental message that we needed to follow was that, in fact, those who are playing unfairly with hardworking people's money ought to be pursued and ought to be penalized. And we haven't seen that. You know, does the SEC need better tools to follow these bad actors? Absolutely. But does that mean we have to tie the whole financial services industry in knots? No. And that's the problem with this law.
What are the tools they need?
Well, they need to have the sort of technology that will allow them to better follow and sort out which institutions are actually putting the folks who are relying on them at the most risk, with taxpayer dollars at stake. That can be done, but you don't have to tie up the whole industry to do that. Right now, community lenders can't do the things they're supposed to be doing because they're subject to rules that don't make sense for them.
Would either of you support sending American ground troops to fight Islamic State militants, and if so, under what circumstances?
I don't support it, and I voted against the president's request for authorization on this. You talk about standing up to your own party, or standing up to your own commander-in-chief. That's a vote I took right before we came back, and I'm proud of that vote because I don't think we have a plan for success. We should do 4 things before we even think about committing American forces. We should commit the country before we commit troops. We should have a clear military objective. We should have the means to accomplish it, and we should have a clear exit strategy. Those 4 elements are not present in the president's plan, and until I'm comfortable that they are, I'm not going to vote to get us involved in the Syrian civil war or in a regional conflict between Shia and Sunni Muslims. We were at the Poughkeepsie Journal a couple weeks ago, and the congresswoman said, well, we're probably going to have to put in American ground troops. I think that's a terrible idea. I want our kids here. Opening businesses, getting a good education, getting a good job, starting a family, growing a business. I want our tax dollars invested in America, not in every country overseas. I want us to build things in the United States again, invest in our infrastructure again, roads and bridges and sewer systems and broadband systems and the Port of Newburgh and things that will create a new generation of wealth, not sending it down the sinkhole of another ground war in the Middle East. And if you look at what has happened since we took that vote, Turkey is not in this fight. The Sunni countries are not in this fight. We do not have a ground army in terms of moderate Syrians, and even the biggest proponents of this idea say we won't for months and months and months. And we should remember that we spent, I believe, $24 billion training up 900,000 members of the Iraqi security forces over the last 10 years. Where are they? Why aren't they in the fight? Where is the inclusive government in Baghdad that we need, that is the cornerstone of the president's strategy? Because if you don't get the Sunni population back engaged in this, we don't have any chance of success. And you don't do that without an inclusive government in Baghdad. That still hasn't happened. There are so many holes in this plan. But look, what we should do is focus on our national security interests. We should capture or kill, bring to justice the people who killed those American journalists. We should focus on our national security objectives, which is to impede the ability of these militants to make strategic progress, stop them at the Mosul Dam, stop them before they get to the Kurdish population centers, and demand that our allies get in this fight with us. That's a sensible, measured approach that won't require American ground forces, that'll get some burden on some other people's taxpayers, not just ours, and that has a real chance of success, at a minimum, of containing the spread of this cancer that is ISIS. But we can make it worse as well as better if we don't think clearly before we stumble into another war in the Middle East. And I'm very passionate about this because we are still recovering from some terrible policies that we are still paying for over the last decade. And if we're going to get this economy growing again, if we're going to get a generation involved in building America again, we cannot make those mistakes again.
You know, I attended the funerals of our fighting men who had fallen when I was a member of Congress, here, right here at West Point, Major Kennedy and Major Volke. And I couldn't agree more that we have precious lives at stake. And unless there's a clear vision from the president, and there has not been, he has not articulated the clear national security interests at stake here. He has not obtained international cooperation. He has not articulated a path to victory or an exit strategy. And there has to be within this accountability to the American people. And unless and until those things pertain, we can't possibly commit our men and women to this effort on the ground. We should be making sure that we are a reliable and strong ally for our friends in the Middle East, including the nation of Israel. The concern about Iran becoming a nuclear power is very real. That plays into our concerns in this region, and I think we have to be a very strong support to Israel in that security effort. And I'm glad that we're helping the Kurds, because they're trying to fend off ISIL on the ground in ways that we should be supporting, and I know we've just sent some material there.
Should the U.S. pay ransom for hostages? Other countries do.
We should not be putting our citizens in harm's way there at this point. One of the major ways that ISIL has gotten publicity for itself and getting funding for itself is through hostage exchange. But I understand why the families of hostages would want to do anything they could to
But should the United
save those
States, would you
people.
support that?
I think it's something that clearly we don't want people to be in that position to begin with, and I think that's our best policy. We need to strike ISIL as forcefully as we can now, and the airstrikes have been fortified over the past couple of weeks. This is not something that we want to make a bargaining chip in our approach to ISIL.
So you don't support?
I don't want to see any more Americans put in that position, and that's why that's got to be the overarching goal.
So I'm trying to get a yes.
Well,
or
I
no.
think we have to. I think you have to have the administration work with the families of these hostages, but obviously, paying ransom encourages more of that kind of behavior. We should have a position, a stance against ISIL that will persuade them that obviously that this is not the way they should be. That this is not going to be profitable for them. They will be punished for their actions against Americans and against their hostages. I mean, that's the key goal. They should never be taking these hostages,
Right.
and they should know.
Congressman? Should you
No,
know this?
no, we should negotiate with terrorists, and we shouldn't pay ransom. And we should capture or kill anybody who harms an American. And we should never stop, as long as it takes. And they'll get that message. But
We do pay ransom for other things, and maybe we don't call it ransom, but we do give money, sell arms, and we'll
I
give.
think it's a terrible policy, and we shouldn't do it. I don't support rewarding terrorism, and I don't support negotiating with terrorists. What I do support is having a strategic vision for the Middle East. and not going from crisis to crisis, playing whack-a-mole with whatever, whatever crisis comes up week by week. Right now, the situation in the Middle East requires a complete rebalancing of the Sunni-Shia power centers. This all is a result of the vacuum that got created when we invaded Iraq and left it unstable. The Iranian influence in Baghdad has created real anxiety among the Sunni population because Iran is a Shiite Persian country. Until you rebalance that, and the Saudis and the Gulf states and the Iranians understand what the new arrangement is, you are going to have these proxy wars being fought. And I do not think the United States should be foolish enough to chase it around in the Middle East until the powers themselves can agree in an international conference that is sponsored by world powers. This was the solution that Secretary of State Jim Baker suggested. Until we get a rebalancing of that, all of this effort to kind of respond to the crisis of the moment is not going to solve the root problem. And I agree with the Congresswoman about one thing, which is that if we go get ourselves involved in the Syrian civil war, we will weaken ourselves for what is really the strategic threat in the region, which is the Iranian nuclear program. And we have to be very clear about stopping that program, not just to protect Israel, though we must, but to protect ourselves and to protect Europe. And I do not believe the American people will understand why we are fighting in Iraq and Syria if you go to them and tell them there's a real threat in Iran. Look, if you look at what happened when I served in the Clinton White House, the president was confronted with a situation in Kosovo. I was the White House staff secretary at that time. I held a code word top secret national security clearance, which means that I got to read all the stuff that went to the president every day and watch the president under a comparable, if perhaps less complicated situation, deal with that terrible war in the Balkans. And if you look at the success of that effort, if you look at the way that he led, but also enrolled the support of our European allies and others, and overcame opposition to do it, but with clear objectives, with the forces to do it, with an exit strategy. That is a much better model than I think what President Obama has pursued in the Middle East. And I think that no amount of a crisis response is gonna take the place of a strategic vision for how we create a new stability in the Middle East, where economic progress and some political freedom can take the place of the crises and sectarian conflict we've seen.
There was a resolution in terms of the response to these kinds of situations. There was a resolution in the House that condemned the exchange of 5 of Guantanamo's most dangerous detainees for Bo Bergdahl. And there was a resolution to condemn that in the House of Representatives, and the congressman voted against it. So.
Well, you darn right I did, and it's because you listen to the guys in uniform and the general officers who say we don't leave American soldiers on the battlefield, and we bring our people home, and then we administer a thing called due process here in the United States. And if you talk to Martin Brennan, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, go down the road and talk to the officers at West Point. They are absolutely clear on this. They want our people back. We don't leave people on the battlefield. And that's what was at issue there, and not anything else we're talking about. It's a totally different issue than what we're talking about here. We're talking about American servicemen. We're not talking about paying ransom for hostages.
But 5 of the most dangerous Guantanamo detainees, not the best
Chris?
option.
You
By
both,
far.
You both have served 2 years in Congress, or almost 2 years. What are the 2 most important things you think you did? And elaborate a bit on how they helped people in the 18th district. You want to go first?
Well, the most important thing I did was to fight every day to try to rein in an agenda that has caused continuing hardship on the folks here in the Hudson Valley. So every action I took was designed to help the folks here, and that's why I have the endorsements of the folks who actually are on the ground creating the jobs, U.S. Chamber and the National Federation of Independent Business. My voting record for the things that mattered most to them: mandate relief, tax relief, making sure that energy prices were affordable, that we had good sources of energy that we could use to create a vibrant economy here, lifting the burdens that have been placed on us by the Affordable Care Act that we can't afford. You know, those were the elements of the fight every single day. There's a Washington agenda, Pelosi, Obama, Maloney agenda that has made life all too difficult here. I'm also very proud of the fact that I was able to work to extend benefits for our Medicare, our seniors on Medicare who've worked so hard for those benefits and put away for them when $716 billion have been cut by people like the Congressman. I worked to make sure those benefits stayed in place, and unemployment benefits and the payroll tax holiday for our middle-class families stayed in place throughout 2012. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to bring home $11.5 billion in a bipartisan way of aid to the Hudson Valley and devastated regions after Hurricane Irene. That is a real thing that I'm very proud of. And I'm very proud of working side by side with my fellow Democrats here and in the House of Representatives to try to pass the Pace Protection Act as the originator of it, so that people could make energy-saving improvements right here at home. You know, I am determined. We've gone a long way toward trying to make sure that people here have the relief they need, but there's a lot more to be accomplished. And of course, that's why I'm seeking to serve the Hudson Valley again.
Farm Bill, absolutely critical for Orange County. It's a $100 million industry in Orange County. You got 10,000 jobs tied to that Farm Bill. Those are the dollars that go around a lot of communities here, at the car dealership, in the hair salon, in the restaurant. We needed a Farm Bill, and we needed one right away. And I'm proud that I got on the Agriculture Committee. The Congresswoman was on the Financial Services Committee, looking after the big banks. I got on the Agriculture Committee because it was important to Orange County. And we got that Farm Bill done. And Ken and I have spoken about this. We've spoken about it in this room. There was a lot of difficult votes in that. There was a lot of bipartisan work that was required to move it forward. And we got a good Farm Bill, the best Farm Bill that's ever been written for the Hudson Valley. Good for our specialty crop producers. Good for our beginning farmers. Great conservation provisions, $1 billion that is going to conserve the land in the Hudson Valley. I wrote the amendment that makes it easier to get land into conservation on the committee, and reform the crop insurance program so our guys get losses when they experience them. Also, flood mitigation in the Farm Bill, looking after the Black Dirt region. We wrote those provisions, so the Secretary of Agriculture's got to pay attention to us. So I'm very proud of that work, and I think it's a template for my other accomplishment that I guess I'm most proud of, which is finding a way to reach across the aisle and be bipartisan. If you want to know why State Senator Bill Larkin, you know, a 30-year conservative in the state Senate, a 24-year veteran of the Army colonel, combat veteran. This guy is no liberal. He's no fan of Democrats. But we got to work together. We got to work together on all kinds of things, like hospice care in New Windsor, on helping the Unity Center, the Armory in Newburgh, on human trafficking legislation that required a state and a federal piece, because we have a human trafficking problem in our communities, on things like the heroin epidemic, on issue after issue. I've worked with my state partners on the state set-aside to help our service-disabled veterans. Go out and talk to Mike Finnegan at Continental Organics, who employs about 20 service-disabled vets. Those kind of service-disabled owned businesses will get $200 million now because I worked with State Senator Greg Ball, who's a Republican, who's also supporting my campaign. So if you wonder why Democrats and Republicans are supporting me, it's because I have a record of getting results with them and putting all the politics aside. And those are my proudest moments in Congress. And that's what works. See, there's people in Washington who think it's all about conflict, right? They think that it's their job to give a speech or go on a cable show and rail against somebody else. But conflict doesn't get anything done. Cooperation does. And that doesn't mean you got to agree with everybody on everything. It just means you have to identify things like Lyme disease or flood mitigation or an infrastructure improvement or a veterans bill or any one of the other 13 bipartisan bills we've passed through the Congress, and find a good partner who cares about it too and get it done. That's what I learned working for Bill Clinton, and that's what I want to do if I get another 2 years in Congress.
The Congressman mentioned veterans, and I did neglect to mention, and should have, that when I found out that, in 2011, I found out the Obama administration wanted to sell off parts of Castle Point and Montrose campuses for private development. I led the fight with Greg Meeks, a fellow member of Congress who's a Democrat and a good friend, and I led the fight to make sure that those campuses would be spared from that program, and they were. And I'm very proud of that. And the congressman has neglected to mention that he voted for $6 billion in cuts to benefits for our veterans and military families. And I can understand why you'd neglect to mention that, Congressman, but that's a very important thing. And
We should really mention that
It's a shame.
that's a charge the congresswoman has been dropping out all over kind of editorial board meetings and debates around the Hudson Valley. You might want to look that one up, because that one has been called shamefully misleading by factcheck.org. Here's why. It was part of the bipartisan compromise to end sequester. It was something that Paul Ryan cooked up. And 360 people voted to end sequester because we were laying off people at West Point because of the sequester mess that they left us. And we were closing the airport tower at Dutchess County, and a bunch of other things, and cutting Title I funding to education. So we had to end sequester. But as soon as we reached that compromise, a bipartisan compromise, a bunch of us went back a couple weeks later and fixed it. There is no $6 billion cut to veterans. That's why it's been called shamefully misleading. My father is a disabled veteran. My dad was 100% disabled when he got out of the military. He spent 3 months in the Naval Hospital. You should be ashamed of yourself playing politics with our veterans.
Well, Congressman, I honor your
listen
dad's
to me.
service,
Listen to me.
and I'm very grateful for that. But you could have fought
helping
that.
our
You could have
veterans.
fought that cut before it happened. But there's nothing in the record saying you did. There's
There
not
is-
an amendment.
there is
there's
no
not
cut.
No letter.
Is there a
There's no
cut?
letter. There was a
is no
$6
cut.
billion cut in the budget
But
bill
was it
he voted
returned?
for.
Was it
And there
returned?
was no sign of protest before you took that vote,
answer's no,
Congressman.
Barry. There's
Not a
no
letter,
cut.
not an amendment, not a comment in the record, not a speech on the floor. Nothing. Zero. Zip. Nada.
Right.
But was it
Opposing that
returned?
cut.
But was it put back in?
He voted for the cut. But it's
The answer
one
is
thing.
yes,
He
we
did
fixed
not.
it.
To wait until there's a hue and cry, to wait until people notice. It's the same theme with FERC,
No,
folks.
it's called
FERC
getting a good
imposed-
result
You
and
did
circling
nothing
back
to
around and
stop
fixing
it.
what's wrong.
Congressman, you did nothing to stop it when it was actually in process, and you could have proposed an amendment. You could have been on the record about it. You did nothing.
Okay,
It's
we're gonna-
the
we're
same
gonna-
with
okay.
FERC
We're gonna-
imposing
we're
these
gonna-
energy prices on us. It's
I
one
wanna
thing
get- I wanna
to
get a
sit
cou-
back
I
and
wanna get a
then to
couple-
wait until people protest and then
And
all
then
of a sudden
people-
get involved.
The readers and the viewers will be able to look it up themselves. I want to get real simple on this one. The Paycheck Fairness Act, legally allowing for, fighting that women are paying women less than men. It would also make it easier for women who feel they have faced discrimination to begin class action lawsuits against their employers. Would you support the Paycheck Fairness Act?
I support equal pay for equal work, and this is coming from a woman who worked in a steel mill double shifts to put myself through college, who worked 100-hour weeks to train as a doctor, who started my own practice from scratch and grew it from scratch. I have worked side by side with and competed with good friends and colleagues who are men all my life, and I absolutely believe in equal pay for equal work.
And that does not answer the question, though. Do you support the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would then allow for that?
We have to have the right kind of measures in place to make sure that women get equal pay for equal work. And we have to make sure that the benefits of that kind of law actually go to the women involved and not to, let's say, to a class action suit per se. Unfortunately, it's well known that most of those,
So how would you
most of
guarantee
those
that,
suits. Well, let's start with the basics. Women are being discriminated against in this economy over and over again. Women are the ones who typically have to leave work first. They're the ones left supporting their families, making the decisions on what they can afford and what they can't, whether they can put food on the table or gas in the tank. I know because I'm a woman who's managed a household, kids, job, and the whole thing. And I have friends who do.
That?
There are good ways to help assure that women have jobs and have the ability to support their families. And you start with lifting all the burdens that have been placed on us already. You can't get away from the terrible economy that we face right now. This is our fundamental problem. Women should absolutely be paid equally for the work they do equally. There can be transparency about these things. No question about it. But first you have to be able, it completely misses the point. if you don't have jobs to go to begin with. Most of small businesses are started by women. Most of the littlest businesses, they're the ones most in trouble. They're the ones most on the line. Jen Heshey in Warwick has been struggling to try to get La Petite Cuisine going and keep it going in this economy. And Jen and I have been in touch for a couple of years now, and she's appealed to the congressman to try to help her to provide the kind of relief that we need from the taxes, the mandates, the burdens that have been placed on us. And she got
So
nowhere.
you
and
say
she got
women
no
with
word
equal
from
pay,
him.
but not
I
this.
absolutely support equal pay for equal work.
But not this act.
Right.
Well, that's a no, Barry. She doesn't support the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would actually create paycheck fairness. See, I mean, what is so, I think, frustrating to folks is when they hear Washington politicians like Nan Hayworth say, I support the goals. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where I think everybody ought to get treated fairly? And then you ask them a simple question like, well, should it be illegal for women to get paid less than men? And you can't get a straight answer. The answer is we should pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. It's a bipartisan bill. And we can do more than that. We can have paid family leave to help families take care of a sick kid and not miss a mortgage payment. We can do that, by the way, without adding to our budget deficit. We can do it with an employer-employee contribution system. Senator Gillibrand and I have a bill that would do that. These are real solutions because we listen to people locally who say, my kid got sick and I couldn't take advantage of the Family and Medical Leave Act because I can't afford to take the time off from work. And listen,
Congressman, answer to a question,
Yeah,
please.
I'd be
You have the opportunity.
Congresswoman, I'd be happy to answer it. I supported delaying the individual mandate because the President of the United States delayed the
What did you
business
do in
mandate.
2014, sir?
If you'll give me an opportunity to answer,
Okay.
Congressman. I'm not quite sure why this is the part of the program where you do the questioning,
Because
but let's go with it.
this is a major burden on folks in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, well, let me answer it. That'd be great. Here's what happened. I voted against it before it was the law because I said we ought to have more time on this thing, and we shouldn't make families, get penalized when businesses aren't. That seemed fair to me. Then 1 million people signed up, and a lot of people were complying with the law. And the question was whether we play this Tea Party game, even while the law's been in effect, and go back and rip it all apart. Now you got some people who are obeying the law, and if you said to the others who didn't, you get a pass, that didn't strike me as fair. So the change in my position that you think is so exciting is in fact the reality that when something is being relied on by 1 million New Yorkers for health care, we shouldn't start going in and blowing up people after they make a good faith decision to follow the law. So of course I have voted against the Affordable Care Act repeatedly, 45% of the time I think against my own president. And the individual mandate is a great example of that. But I guess this game of gotcha we're playing is trying to make some point. I don't know what it is. I think the point is you're either going to work to make it better and make it show up in the lives of real people as something that is better than what they had, or you're going to play this game that we can go back and fight and engage in
It's
gridlock
not a
and
game.
get
These
nowhere.
are real people's lives
We've
and
been here-
livelihoods.
We've been here for almost 90 minutes, so I'm going to give you both a chance for some closings. Dr. Hayworth, again, your opportunity to go back into Congress, what would you want to do that maybe you didn't accomplish last time that, given the chance, you could do now?
Right, I want to help the folks in the Hudson Valley like Jen Heshey from La Petite Cuisine, a small businesswoman, one of the people who wants to just work hard, make great food, and provide a great service to her neighbors in Warwick, and she can't do it. She can't afford to do it here in the Hudson Valley because the cost of living and doing business here is so incredibly high. There is an agenda of burdens that have come down on us from Washington under then Speaker Pelosi, whom the Congressman wants to return to that position, under President Obama, that have placed burdens that we can't afford on Hudson Valley families. They have made our insurance less they've made us less able to afford our insurance. They've made it more costly. They've made our energy more costly. They have made our electricity more costly. The Congressman's plan for our energy would immediately raise prices, make it harder for us to live here, cause 2,000 people to lose their jobs, and pollute the Hudson Valley. That's not the kind of Washington agenda that we can support. We need to be able to have jobs and businesses and hiring right here in the Hudson Valley. And if we can lift some of those unreasonable burdens, not give $1 trillion to the insurance industry and take $716 billion out of Medicare that our seniors can't afford. Our seniors are asking me every day how they can afford to live in the Hudson Valley. What do they mention? Their Medicare benefits being cut, and the price of general cost of living and the price of electricity came up specifically. The congressman has had the option over and over again, the choice, the chance, the individual mandate being just one example, the REINS Act being another example, to make Washington accountable, to reduce burdens, to lift burdens, and instead he has made our life harder over and over again. I'm here because I stand with the folks here in Orange County. I stand with Jen Heshey and all the people who are just trying to make it here and should be able to and could be able to if we didn't have a Washington agenda crushing us with burdens we can't afford. The congressman stands with Washington.
Congressman?
Well, thank you all for a lively conversation. Look, I came to you 2 years ago and I said I want to take a bipartisan approach to this job and I want to focus on results. I'm back 2 years later and I'm encouraging you to look at that record. It's a lot of rhetoric you hear. I get it. It's the political silly season, but check it out. We got to work on disaster relief and got good results. About $137 million back to Orange County. Got on the Agriculture Committee, fought our way through a lot of obstacles and got a good farm bill for the Hudson Valley. Got on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, got a good result with a $1.6 billion TIFIA loan for the Tappan Zee Bridge. We got to work on 2,000 individual constituent cases over the last 20 months or so. We've returned $3-point-something million to those 2,000 people. We've helped 600 vets, one at a time. Guys like Ed Kakis that you wrote about out in Sparrowbush, so he's still in his house today getting the benefits he deserved. Turned about $1.9 million to those veterans and their military families. Because it's my job to work for you. It's my job to be your employee and your advocate and your voice. And those are lessons I learned, working on for Bill Clinton. And I think if you look at my approach, what I told you, that I would be a Bill Clinton Democrat, that I would focus like a laser beam on the middle class, that I would fight for job creation here in Orange County. That means the Farm Bill. That means rebuilding the Port of Newburgh. That means keeping Hudson Valley lighting here and helping tailor biomass. Now, none of these decisions are always perfect or easy, and it's easy to criticize things that I've done. I'm not perfect, but I am up there every day fighting for what makes sense for middle-class families here in the Hudson Valley, and I'm pretty proud of the record that I've built in the first 2 years as a freshman in the minority. Getting 13 bills passed, that's pretty good. And doing the constituent work we've done, I'm proud of that. The disaster relief for Orange County, I'm proud of that. And this is exactly what I'm hoping to do over the next 2 years, is continue to work on projects that show up and make a difference and mean something in the lives of middle-class families like the ones I grew up in. And be one voice down in Washington who is not yelling at somebody, who is not on some cable show or giving some stupid speech, but is in fact focused on solutions that I heard about locally and that I did something on. And I'm asking for a 2-year renewal on this contract, and I appreciate your attention and that of the folks viewing.
Congressman Maloney, Dr. Hayworth, I really appreciate you both coming in. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.